My research over the course of the last 10 years in making this film was in depth. It involved spending a lot of time at public libraries. Predominantly, my time was spent during the research of this at the downtown branch of LAPL, the Central Library. And as the article that inspired the piece talks about, which was written by a former Salt Lake City librarian who was retiring, a gentleman named Chip Ward, his essay talks about how libraries have become de facto homeless shelters and how librarians have become first responders and de facto social workers. So in taking that piece that he wrote, this essay, and now doing my own research in the library, I was fascinated to really learn that it had gotten to this epidemic place, that it was not just something that was isolated to Salt Lake City, that it was across the country, that libraries were in fact the de facto shelters. So in spending the time in the library and talking to individuals who were experiencing homelessness in that particular library, I was met with some skepticism, some mistrust. There was, I think it's that fine line for any researcher, any journalist, when you step into the subject matter and you are fully immersed. There's that fine line between being a vulture versus being a researcher. And so many individuals shared their experiences of how they arrived in this condition or in situation. So for me, I was very truthful. I was very forthcoming. I told them I was making this film and that I would love to hear their stories. And some of them were heartbreaking, and some of them were quite hilarious. And I think that is reflected in the film. While the film deals with very important and topical subjects, it's also very entertaining. It's also very funny. My overall mission with this film was to celebrate diversity among the cast and inclusion. That was always primary for me, that I would write roles that were that could be played by any actor. For me, this was, I wanted to break all the stereotypes. I wanted to break the stereotypes of what we see generally in movies that involve homelessness, what we see, and rarely when we see librarians depicted on screen. Again, it's very stereotypical, so I wanted to break all those stereotypes. I wanted to put librarians and social advocates for the homeless and homeless individuals themselves. I wanted to put them in a cape and a mask and have them be celebrated on screen. And so in our screenings across the country, and we've screened for individuals experiencing homelessness, we've screened for librarians, they are seeing themselves on screen, and they're in these heroic roles, and they're feeling counted and no longer unsung. There was no actual real-life event that inspired this movie. However, over the 12 years that it's taken to get from inception to where we are now with the release of the film, every story that is in this movie is playing out and has played out in real time over the course of the last decade, including the polar vortex that descended on especially the middle of the country in the early part of this year. So every individual story in this movie is inspired by real events, but it's a fictional presentation.